not lose too much time. Good afternoon, everybody. I welcome you from Medical Care Service for Refugees Bochum, a social medical human rights organization and psychosocial treatment center for survivors of torture and war. My name is Bianca Schmolze, and I'm responsible for human rights advocacy projects in our organization, focusing on refugees' rights and the rights of survivors of crimes against humanity to truth, justice, and integral reparation. With Medico International and the Institute for the International Law of Peace and Armed Conflict, we have two excellent cooperation partners in which to realize this digital lecture series on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the UN Refugees Convention. I also like to thank the Foundation for Environment and Development North Rhine-Westphalia and Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for funding this project. Before we start, let me introduce you my colleague Ramona Lenz from Medico International.
Thank you very much, Bianca. I'm very honored to co-chair this panel with you. Thanks a lot for all the effort you put into this wonderful lecture series. I am responsible for refugee and migration issues within the German Frankfurt-based human rights organization Medico International. We support the self-organization of refugees and migrants in countries like Mali, Sierra Leone, Morocco, Niger, but also in Greece, where we cooperated with Shirin Tinnesand, who is also here today. She will be introduced in a few minutes. And besides refugees and migrant self-organizations, we also support solidarity structures as the Grupa Granica, which assists refugees in the Polish-Belarusian border area. The situation at the external borders of the EU constantly generates new emergencies. Fortress Europe is building its visible and invisible walls higher and higher in order to prevent refugees from entering its territory. Border controls, illegal pushbacks, and deals with often authoritarian regimes keep refugees systematically out of the EU and violate their rights, which are actually guaranteed by the Geneva Convention. Even the living conditions of refugees here who made it into the European Union are intentionally miserable in order to send a message to refugees abroad that they are not welcome here. In this session, we want to discuss about this EU refugee policy, but also how refugees' rights can be strengthened and how we can challenge member states' shortcomings and violations of the Geneva Convention. Let me now start to introduce our panelists. I'm very happy that Isabel Shayani is with us. She's a very well-known TV journalist who reports tirelessly about the ill treatment of refugees at the external and also sometimes internal borders of the EU. I remember something from Paris. At one point, you made a reportage in Paris about Afghan refugees, as far as I remember. So we can talk about the internal and external borders, maybe. And for her reporting on the miserable situation of refugees in Moria on the Greek island of Lesbos, she received the Grimme Award. Congratulations. Very glad you're here with us.
Thank you. Our next guest is Marie von Manteuffel, who works with Médecins Sans Frontières in Libya to support refugees, one of the places where refugees have no rights and experience human rights violations such as illegal detention, ill treatment, torture, slavery, abductions for ransom money, and forced disappearance. As the situation in Libya is still dangerous, we are very happy that you can be here with us to present the work of Médecins Sans Frontières.
We also welcome Shirin Tinnesand. Shirin is a human rights activist who observed the situation of refugees and the role of NGOs on the Greek island of Lesbos. We used to cooperate in supporting the self-organizations of refugees in Moria camp. Currently, Shirin is working at the Oslo Metropolitan University in Norway, exploring the partly shady role of international aid agencies in refugee camps and areas of conflict.
Maximilian Pichel is jurist and interim professor for political science at University of Kassel, who wrote the study The Moria Complex for Medico International, analyzing EU refugee policy and especially the EU-Turkey deal, and who states that we need a refugee policy that guarantees refugee rights that are systematically denied.
Last but not least, we have Julian Parker with us. Julian has a lot of experience with sea rescue missions to save refugees in distress trying to enter the European Union by crossing the Mediterranean Sea. Until last year, he was responsible for advocacy and public relations with the sea rescue organization CI. And recently, he became a new member of the German Bundestag. As a member of the Green Party, he will now try to find political solutions to strengthen refugees' rights. Thank you all for being here.
So before we start with the panel, just some technical hints. You can write at any time under the F&A Q&A button your questions and remarks. We are going to collect them. And at the end, we are going to bring them into discussion without saying your name, because we want to publish this webinar afterwards, and it's for data security. Okay. So in the last session, we discussed about new emergencies and protracted situations, as well as the Global Compact on Refugees, a global attempt to improve international refugee protection against the background of dwindling political will to find sustainable solutions for refugees to participate in resettlement, to show solidarity by sharing responsibility, and to guarantee refugees' rights. Dear Maximilian, last year, the EU drafted the EU Pact on Asylum and Migration. Can you shortly explain its content and how it may contradict the Global Compact of the UN or even the Refugees Convention to understand the legal framework of refugee policy within the EU?
Yeah, I think the new Pact for Migration and Asylum was described by the European Commission as a fresh start on migration in Europe. But actually, we can observe, like before with the European agenda on migration, there's a standstill in the negotiations. In September, the Commission published a detailed report that there's been good progress at a technical level, but political agreement on some key elements is still distant. In fact, the new presidency of France in the Council will be crucial. And President Macron said a few days ago that he wants to install a stronger border protection mechanism. But I think it is a fatal sign that 2 days ago he appeared with Viktor Orban before the press and stating that they want to find a common solution about migration. But I mean, Orban's approach is to clearly have no refugees in Europe. So what would be the compromise? I mean, we can really see, and this is also part of the discussions about the new pact, that for 30 years now, the European ministries of interior have been pursuing a single goal in migration control policy. So the individual right to asylum is to be upheld and maintained on the paper, but de facto we can see that refugees are not supposed to be given access to fully fledged asylum procedures. So in reality, the rights of refugees also guaranteed in the Geneva Convention are strongly contested. And the pact does not constitute a breach with this policy, but is rather a continuation of this policy. The new pact introduces a new screening regulation. So every asylum seeker who is coming to Europe will be an object of checks of health, identity and security at the external borders. And I think we can all see that under the circumstances we have right now, this would also lead to some sort of detention. And the EU is now also providing financial assistance to new detention facilities on the Greek islands. And I think this is also some part of this approach, which we can see in the new pact. So there's no fundamental breach with the logics of externalization, the detention of asylum seekers at Europe's borders. And the pact also speaks of a new solidarity mechanism, but it's a really complicated one. And it is not obligatory. And also on the other hand, there are almost no legal entries for refugees from outside of Europe. So I think that this is really one of the blind spots of the new pact we have. So such an approach, which lacks a real responsibility for refugee protection, goes, I would say, hand in hand with the disenfranchisement of refugees who have no real access to the rule of law. And from the research of Bernd Kasparek, Sabine Hess and Valeria Hensel, they show really in their research that the tools of the pact, they have not a function to prevent situations like on the Greek islands, but the Greek hotspot system is more like a laboratory for executive practices which are now included into law. So when the pact speaks of fast and effective asylum procedures, this sounds nice for governments, but we know in reality what that means when we look at the borders of the European Union right now. For refugees, the reality is that these procedures systematically lack quality standards. They are very often contrary to European law, even if the European Asylum Support Office is involved, and EASO is one part of the problem, not only part of the solution. And many refugees have no contact with lawyers at all, so they have no access to the rule of law at the external borders of the European Union. So the new pact is effectively a pact between European states against migrants, which Bernd Kasparek and Charles Heller say. So for the last point of my statement, why is Europe following such a restrictive approach 70 years after the adoption of the Geneva Convention? I would say one narrative by the European Commission is that uncontrolled external borders would undermine the Schengen area and the ability of European citizens to move freely. And they think that this would also support the strategies of authoritarian leaders to use migration as a propaganda tool for their interests. But also in times of lesser migration movements, we can observe that in Europe, European governments are building fences, they are enforcing harsher border control restrictions, and the erosion of the rule of law goes hand in hand with the erosion of the rule of law inside of Europe. Yeah, we can observe that at the Polish-Belarusian border, where the Polish government does not allow European journalists to document what is happening there. We can see this in aggressive campaigns by Orban's government against human rights organizations. And I would say every concession by Europe to these authoritarian leaders is not a move into the right direction. So I think the pact is using a toolbox of authoritarian measures against migrants and refugees, which will deepen the crisis of the rule of law and not also of the European migration policies, but really of the foundations of the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Maximilian. So we will continue later further on this one. Dear Isabel Shayani, you reported intensely and in a very humane way about the situation of refugees at EU external borders. You were in Greece, in the Balkans, and also at the Polish-Belarusian border. In all these places, refugees were stuck in camps or in wild nature without any effective support by local governments, as they only try to get rid of these people who seek protection. Please tell us about your experience and observations as journalists. Which human rights violations could you observe? And can you describe the living conditions of the people you met? And did you observe directly illegal pushbacks? I think you are also still in touch with a lot of people you met. So please just tell us a little bit about what you experienced with them.
Thank you very much for this panel, and thank you for sharing thoughts and experiences. And I really enjoyed what Maximilian just said, to have the other perspective, and I'm really keen to hear the other perspectives of the other panelists. So, well, I can probably share some situations, because my perspective definitely is one that I'm looking at the phenomena and at what is happening at the spot. Yes, we were in Bosnia in January, and effectively we watched a pushback, and IOM was involved. So it was like about 24 people, most of them children, Afghans, and they were hiding in a little hood, in a little hat, nicht hood, close to the Croatian border. And then IOM came together with a special security force from Bosnia, and they picked them up and they brought them back to the camp. And this happens, I don't know, I guess like many times. For me, it was new that IOM, the International Organization for Migration, is actually involved in pushbacks like this. This happened to my surprise. I mean, the situation at the Croatian border is well known to everyone. I can probably tell you one story of an Iranian Sufi sheikh, which I thought was, which I couldn't really get rid of. He tried twice to cross the border. He was in Iran in prison for 7 times, and the case was reported on BBC, and he was pretty well known in the Iranian public. Amir Labov is his name. So he made it to the Bosnian border. He crossed it once with a group and with traffickers, and then the Croatian police passed by, and then he stepped back because he didn't want the car to run over him. And the moment he stepped back, he fell down a mountain. So he was lying on the ground. He couldn't move anymore. He told the others, please go on. I will get away from here. So in the end, what happened was the Croatian police picked him up. Yes. They brought him to hospital. Yes. In the hospital, he said straight away, I want asylum. And what happened was the very next day, they took him with his shorts and with his t-shirt, and they threw him into the forest on the Bosnian side. He arrived in Bosnia. I don't know, actually, I don't know how he really made it. And then they told him, okay, you can't move your legs anymore because your spinal column is broke. A year later, he tried it again because he's worried about his wife and the 4 children in Iran. He was worried that they might be under pressure as he is an active Sufi. So he tried it again, and then the trafficker said, after having brought him across the little river, they said, okay, now you walk 2 hours. And he said, Baba, I can't walk. I'm sitting in this wheelchair. So they said, oh, no problem. Somebody will come and pick you up. Nobody came to pick him up. Same procedure as a year before. Yes, it was a year before. The Croatian police found him. They took him and they threw him again back on the Bosnian side. Then he complained through UNHCR. And I was really wondering if a case like his, which is already documented and which is public, and he really fulfills the Geneva criteria, what the hell, what kind of torture do you have to prove that you have a chance to legally get protection once you enter the European Union? So he complained. The Croatians said everything was fine. UNHCR didn't do anything. The Bosnians, after a while, finally really gave him protection. And then he was afraid in Bosnia because he thought they are too close to Iran. Germany wasn't open to take him, and now he arrived, I guess it was 6 weeks ago in Luxembourg. So Luxembourg took him. And I think for me, this case, which is really a bitter case, because, you know, there's this person who tried it once and he fails and he ends up in this wheelchair. He tries it again and they throw him back. It is really a strong image of how difficult it is to cross this border. Now, of course, if you're young and male, it might end up completely different, and you don't have a story, and still you enter the European Union and you tell your story and you get protection. But it is... I was really shocked that the Croatians pushed him back in such an obvious and evident way. This is one story that I would like to share. The other one is, you said I've been to Greece. I mean, all of you have probably been much more to Greece than I, because when we go, we just like stay there 3 or 4 days, or maybe 5, but then we hurry back. Because we feel we have to hurry, otherwise we don't feel we are important. So we always feel we don't have time. You know that right now in Germany, we have, probably all are involved in this, we have this phenomena of the so-called secondary migration, Sekundärmigration, right? So we are witnessing, I guess, about 30 to 40,000 people who have been through the whole procedure in Greece, like they have been to Moria, they have been to Samos, etc. And then they were in Athens and they failed, but they have been accepted by Greece authorities. So they come to Germany, and once they're here, they are allowed to stay 90 days, or they have to ask for asylum again. So what we are witnessing here, or what I witness, is you have a lot of families, and you have a lot of families from Afghanistan. And so here we were in Eisenhüttenstadt, which is the camp close to the German-Polish border. And if you make it that way, then this is where you end up. So, and we were there in early October, and it was still packed. Now it's much emptier. And 90% of the people were in a quite, how should I say, optimistic mood. And those were the ones who had come through Belarus. They were mostly male, and to be honest, I wasn't in love with any one of them, so I didn't really know who are these people who are coming. And 10% of the people in Eisenhüttenstadt were those who came through secondary migration. So this was the fast lane coming from Belarus. There was 3 guys from Zaatari, from the camp in Jordan, and they said, we made it in, I think it was 11 or 13 days. That was like the new high score. And then you had the other families who had been on their way for minimum 2 years. So there was this boy, while I was interviewing some Yemeni guy who was simply just in a, you could say, in a shock, because he was amazed that he was still alive and that he had made it in such a quick time. It was really this kind of a mood. So I made it to my goal. And so there was this little boy who like said, hello. And I said, hello. And then he said in German, hallo, wie geht es Ihnen? And I said, oh, you speak German. And then that was his German. And then we ended up in Persian. And so I said, who are you? And he said, I'm Elias and I'm 12. And I said, oh, hi. So where are you from? And he said, I'm from Afghanistan. And I said, so how did you come? And he said, well, and then here came a story, which you all know. The story is Iran, where he couldn't go to school. Then he came to Greece, where he asked every other day to go to school. And now he was in Eisenhüttenstadt. And he said, I'm so happy. And I said, why are you happy? It wasn't really a place where I would be glad to be. So it's more a place where you think, okay, let's get away from here. And he said, I'm happy. And I said, why? And he said, it's the first time in my life that I can go to school. And I said, what? And he said, it's the first time. And this was the point that made him extremely proud. I have a German teacher, a real German teacher. And I said, wow. And after a while, I understood it. At the very moment, I didn't understand that this 12-year-old boy had never been to school. And now in Eisenhüttenstadt, in this camp, it was the first opportunity for him to study. And this was something. So here you have the quick lane, which is Belarus, Poland. And there you have the tough lane, of course, through, well, there are different ways, as you all know, Greece and then Germany. And this is really, well, it's a tough reality. Having said this, now this is my last comment and then I will stop preaching. I think for me, and probably also for you who are describing reality and who are describing human rights violations, I find it way easier to describe this than to find solutions. Because I find whenever you talk about solutions, it's not as pleasant, because of course you have to talk about deportation, and of course you have to talk about legal consequences, because people are crossing borders illegally. In Persian, you probably know this expression. In Persian, they say gem zadan, which means we play the game, and they call it game. So the verb as such means to play a game, and this means to cross the border illegally. Sorry. And then you ask in Persian, how often did you play the game? Chambor game ozadi. And it's a completely ordinary expression that you use. You probably all have heard about it. And this shows how rude reality has become. And again, it's much easier to, in my role, I find is much easier to go and to listen to people and to be in touch with them and to feel sorry with them and to say, oh, what a difficult life, than to really find solutions that are realistic and which also might find a political majority.
But your reports are a very important input to find political solutions that are hopefully in favor of refugees' rights in the future, but also about that we are going to discuss later. So now, dear Shireen, so you work with Wadi and self-organized groups of refugees, such as the Moria White Helmets, and you know the situation of refugees on the Greek island. Can you please describe us the living conditions of refugees in Lesbos in the new refugee camp, Karatepe? Are there any improvements in comparison to the Moria camp, or are there even deteriorations?
So thank you so much for having me here. Let's start with that. And as you ask me the question, I come to mind the quote, or I would like to paraphrase Karl Marx with this whole situation that when the conditions are standing on its head, we urgently have to move it down to its feet. And I feel like that with this whole situation, because here we are reflecting over the Geneva Convention 70 years later, and the whole situation is currently on its head. We need to bring all the conditions down to his feet. The Geneva Convention, like Max started with, is laws. And yet these are the type of depictions that we are getting, such as Marie just described. And it's a twisted reality. So even talking about the improvements from Moria 1 to Moria 2, I urge that we take it into the perspective of talking about what it should be like and not what it is. Because what it is, you know, objectively the same as being the only sane person in a madhouse or the only mad person in a sane environment. So in terms of what all Moria was like, in all honesty, it's not too far removed from what was just shared by Marie. There was lots of violent security issues, medical issues, legal issues. I don't even know where to start. So absolutely, there have been improvements made from old Moria camp to the new one. So the first thing that we saw last year was the security was being improved. The violence went down. Women no longer had to be fearful to the same extent as they were in old Moria in the new camp, that when they were going to the toilet, they didn't have to be fearful to get raped. So a lot of women in old Moria camp, they would sleep with diapers because of this very legitimate fear. That is what old Moria was like. This, to a large extent, went down and were reduced inside the new camp. Security really got sharpened. I would also just like to emphasize that from the start of January 2020, going to June 2020, 6 people were reported murdered inside Moria in half a year in 2020. This is legitimate statistics that the US embassy in Greece has published. This is their statistic. And all in all, it was 24 cases, serious cases. And this is what Europe's largest refugee camp was like. So, you know, it can only get better, at least that's what we thought. So when the new camp were constructed, we had all the flood. We had, you know, 9 weeks in, finally people were offered a shower. The shower were basically just 4 metal poles with a little bit of cloth around it, and people were expected to go in, dress down, take a bucket shower with cold water because there were no warm water at the time, and take it open air with lots of other people. That was the first shower opportunity being offered to people. That was in the new camp. So from last year going to this year, we've seen major improvements. Just to emphasize that right now, the situation is that in the new camp is that there is no camp management. We're still waiting to get a new one, and we hope that this is going to get better, but still everything is not where it should be. Children are still not being offered formal education, and we can only question what is the consequence of children losing out education in a digitalized society. It's going to be tremendous consequence for them at a personal level, but also at a societal level. But in terms of the infrastructure, now there is more infrastructure inside the camp. We had the Pope visiting just now at the start of December. Just to clarify, a lot of people have been staying in tents. When the Pope came to visit, these people were moved into isoboxes like that. So it's not a matter of resources, clearly. But when you come and see the camp right now, it's hard to believe that it looked like it did just a year ago. So right now, the infrastructure is not the biggest problem. We do, however, have other challenges. Still, we're at a point, despite the tremendous amount of money and resources and amount of even actors involved in trying to make this camp decent, we are still now facing a winter just like we did at the start of this year, where we're going into a winter where people were going to be cold. At least that's what we're predicting, because we still don't have powerful enough generators to supply heating, warming elements for the people living. And in terms of the landscape, it's just near the sea or the ocean. So it's super susceptible to any type of weather. There's very harsh wind. When it's raining, it really hits them quite hard. Even now with advanced infrastructure, we just saw now a couple of weeks back that still there are floods and I don't know what's. And I mean, this is happening in Europe. This is what is happening in Europe. The baseline is this is Europe, and we can do so much better. And even with all these resources going in, I don't know. I find it very hard. And I also wanted to emphasize another point that we are seeing, and that is in terms of press freedom. So one thing is what is happening inside the camp. Another thing is what is getting out of the camp. So just now in November, we have seen one journalist that had to leave Greece, a Dutch journalist that had to leave Greece when she was questioning the Prime Minister Mitsotakis about these conditions. She faced so much harassment. She got absolutely no support from the Greek government in terms of security. And as a consequence, she had to leave Greece after having been here for, I think, almost close to 40 years. This is her home. And simultaneously, another journalist, it was discovered that he was being surveillanced by the intelligence of Greece. The article which he was in the making was about a 12-year-old refugee or asylum seeker. And this article was pulled back, and it was discovered that he was under the scrutiny of the intelligence. And we also had a journalist here at Lesbos, which was arrested inside the camp for wanting to document it. Plus, we also have in Greece now, we have the so-called fake news law, which was implemented on the 12th of November, and is supposed to prevent people from spreading lies. This is how they share it. But the way that it can be used, I mean, Human Rights Watch already went out and said they're quite concerned about what could potentially be the consequence of such a law, because it now enables the Greek state to imprison whoever comes with what they consider a lie in the public space or imprint it like in the social media or public anywhere, to imprison them for up to 5 years for spreading lies or whatever they are not happy with. So I'm not sure. In terms of infrastructure, for sure, it's getting better. That's just also a side effect of the depopulation. Now there's around 1,500 people in the camp, and that automatically makes things much better than compared to 20,000, which it was before. In terms of rights, we're nowhere near where we should be on any aspect.
Thank you so much. This very important aspect on the criminalization, not only of journalists, but also of human rights activists in this context. We are coming back to that later. So, but what was part of your work, Shirin, was also to observe and to criticize the role of NGOs that are active in the refugee camps. So please try as short as possible, but please just tell us what you experienced with them.
So to keep it as short as I can, the state is a rights provider, the asylum seeker is the rights seeker, just to keep it short. And with the state, as is summarized also in the Moria complex, the state is basically outsourcing its own duties over to the NGOs, and the NGOs form a wall between the rights provider and the rights seeker. They're in the way, and it creates a lot of confusion. And going into that is also, it's a lack of criticism for having to take on such a role. These are duties and responsibilities previously seen as the duty of the state, and is conducted by NGOs who doesn't have any experience or even mandate to perform such a task, and yet they take it on. And this is what is creating a lot of confusion in terms of the asylum seekers. Where should they go to retrieve their rights? What is their right? How that, like Mike said, a lot of the asylum seekers, they don't know what their rights is. And then you have a lot of people who are, they come in here, they volunteer. I don't want to blame them for that. That's a responsibility of the aid organization, but they come in here, they don't have any education, experience, or any qualification to be in such a legally complicated environment, and yet they take on the tasks which are quite important, and they're professionals. So they don't know the rights of the asylum seekers which they are working with, and all of this just creates a lot of confusion. And the whole thing of being unprofessional is what has created a consensus here. And I think in a grander perspective, let's just go into the narrative a little bit and talk about the narrative, because when we're talking about refugees, when we're talking about asylum seekers, we automatically treat them differently. We do this without thinking, because we have ascribed certain features onto these people, which are frankly unrealistic. And this is what is creating the situation that you have a lot of well-hearted, well-meaning, good-intentioned volunteers wanting to come to a place such as Greece, to come with the expectation that they can come into the refugee camp and start playing with the children. But in what society does parents teach their children to play with strangers? They don't. So it's a complete absurd idea that young people from all over Europe wants to come to this Greek refugee camp and play with the kids. It's completely absurd. And this goes into the distance between claiming your rights, and even professional aid is a right of asylum seekers. I'm not sure that explained it. I hope so.
I think we can also come back to this discussion later on, because I think that's also a very crucial aspect to be aware of. Yeah. So therefore, thank you very much for your work on that. So our next guest, dear Julian, before you had your mandate as member of German Bundestag, you were very, very active in the sea rescue projects to help refugees to try to cross the Mediterranean Sea. Until the end of October 2021, more than 1,400 refugees died in the Mediterranean Sea. That's the number I found out. So please tell us why sea rescue projects are still necessary and what difficulties you have to deal with when you try to save refugees. So how do you deal with stressful or even dangerous situations when it comes to illegal pushbacks?
That's actually a pretty broad question. I tried to narrow it down a little bit. I've been on the Mediterranean a couple of times before I decided to stay on shore and instead work on social media, on press, on advocacy to somehow transport what we're seeing and observing, and to create a platform for what is going on there in this complete vacuum on the Mediterranean, where nobody really can get an idea of if you haven't been there. I think one of the major issues for us as organizations was, of course, the massive criminalization of search and rescue organizations. In 2017, I was working for the organization Jugendrettet, which was running the Juventa by that time on the Mediterranean. Our ship was the very first one that was confiscated, that was put under harsh measures by the Italian government. And that was only what we didn't understand by that time, but what we see now, that was the beginning of search and rescue organizations being heavily criminalized, being put under investigations with the Italian intelligence on us, spying on us. They even bugged our bridge, they surveilled our phones. So that was something completely new, because before we kind of had this naive feeling that we will do something good. But by now, I mean, we're seeing challenges that come with that, and that results from the missing willingness to receive people, missing willingness of EU states to receive people on the move. So ships are not finding a safe port. They're drifting in front of ports for days, or in the past we've seen them drifting there for weeks. And also, I think with that, it combines that the European Union is not standing in solidarity with the states at the European external borders. And then finally, of course, they've been mentioned before a couple of times, the so-called Libyan Coast Guard, which is not a Coast Guard at all. It's what I would call a militia that is funded by EU money. that is mostly threatening people on the move, but sometimes even us. And this is something that made our work extremely difficult. I'm saying our, I mean, now I'm part of a party and a fraction in the German Bundestag, which is pretty weird because I'm somehow a bridge between these two worlds. But I mean, it also brings a lot of challenges for refugees, for people on the move there. We've heard from Livia, from Marie, what she's been telling us. That is something that we're also dealing with on sea when we try to treat people medically and physically, which is extremely difficult on a ship. And we're also seeing the external borders being pushed away further every year, always further down. That's making it very difficult for us to actually help the people there. But I don't want to end with a description on how sad everything is, because we're also seeing a counter movement to what European governments and the European Commission have been doing over the past years, and that is that these search and rescue organizations have been nominated by the European Parliament for the Sakharov Prize. We're seeing a movement of large cities from Berlin to Marseille to Munich to Palermo that declare themselves a safe port, a safe haven for people on the move. And this is, I think, the counter narrative and the counter movement that we need to strengthen to actually win something for those people standing there at our external borders and to provide them with a place of safety and, most important, I think, their dignity.
You were also with a delegation at the Polish-Belarusian border some weeks ago. So can you all tell us what you experienced there, what you observed there, and what are your plans also with the new government to resolve this critical situation?
I think the new plans are something that everybody is very keen on knowing. I assume. Yes, I've been there with a colleague. She's actually sitting right behind this wall because we're still sharing office here. Merle Spellerberg. And what we experienced there, sorry, the phone's going on, was something that really touched and moved me, and still is. We met people there in camps that were just a shelter for a few days, and they told us about their journey, that they were pushed back over the border from Poland back to Belarus 6 to 9 times with broken ribs. They were heavily beaten by the Belarusians. No food. They had to drink water from pits. They had to eat leaves from the trees because they were in an area where no one was living, where no one was granted access to help them. They weren't provided with any food or water at all, not even talking about medical aid. At the same time, we had the debate going on in Germany and also in other states and on the EU level that this is a warfare that's going on and that Europe is being threatened. And then you're standing there in front of these people that have nothing than a shirt on, and you could really feel that they were almost giving up themselves, didn't really know what to do, where to go next. And that should be a threat to Europe. That was something I just couldn't really and cannot really comprehend. And then we returned, and Merle and I and many others from our party are pushing forward the plans to get the people that are standing there at the border out of this zone, because the most important thing, if we think about it in steps in a very technical way, we need to provide them first with the aid they need in this moment. Claiming asylum is something that has to follow, of course, but first they need medical aid, they need food, they need water, and a warm place because it's winter. And then, of course, the European countries need to provide them with a safe place and need to accept their asylum. And that also means that Germany needs to take in people. The number can vary. In some calculations, it says that Germany should take up to 40%. I don't want to talk about any specific numbers, but this is a shared responsibility that we need to push forward with the states that are willing to help. And I know from many talks that diplomacy is already working on it heavily to find a way, because we're facing a very fundamental problem. Poland is not willing at all to accept the people, and not even to like let them in and being transferred to Germany right away. And this is just logistically a huge problem, because we could now start talks with other countries that share a border with Belarus, but that would mean that the people on the Belarusian side would need to be allowed to travel. And right now they aren't, because they are in this region on the Belarusian side, locked, cannot really travel to the north. And that is making it really difficult to organize help. But it's something we are hotly working on, especially me. And I hope that we will see progress there before Christmas. That's my huge hope. And I have reasons to be optimistic. That's all I can say today.
So I hope that you're right, that there will be some positive message before Christmas. I think that would be, it is time to hear some good news about that. So I wish you all best luck for that. So before we go into the next round of questions, there were some questions of understanding. So perhaps we take them now.
Yes, some have already been answered in the chat. I think there were 2 questions for Marie and 1 or 2 for Shirin. Shirin, you also already answered them partly, but maybe I repeat again. There was one question, if you know anything about the islands of Kos and Samos. Maybe you can add a few, information, a bit of information on that. And the other question was if there's legal aid in the camps.
Sure. In terms of Kos and Samos, these are very different islands. You can't really compare them, because Samos is very similar to Lesbos and Kos is something else altogether. So Kos never had this mushrooming of NGOs, but Samos and Lesbos had. And this is not to say that NGOs is the main cause of it. It's only to create awareness that they also play, some of them also play a role, a quite significant role in what Moria turned into be. So in terms of Samos, they also had this thing of a very high number of NGOs. Like if we take Lesbos again as an example, after the camp burnt down and a new one was created, so many actors were underground, so much money and resources went into it, not only from the Greek state and UN, but also from the NGOs. And still, you know, looking at the result is still not up to standard. And that's where we need to set a question mark. So the same thing is also in Samos, that this type of confusion is also relevant there, but you don't have the same system in Kos. In terms of legal aid centers, yes, we do have them, but also, again, like I answered in the chat, even though there are several legal centered and they are not the most representative ones in terms of getting information, that's not because they're not invalid, it's just because the volunteer scene or volunteerism, now I'm talking about untrained volunteers, I'm not talking about trained volunteers, is so great altogether that this is part of creating the confusion. And this is where the asylum seekers will go to retrieve information, and when they don't know, or when they don't redirect them to the legal centers, then they're not going to receive this information. So it's a systemic failure out of anything. And right now, I think it's a little bit better, but at least back when there were over 20,000 refugees, the legal aid centers were not able to reach everyone. It simply wasn't. So then again, going back to the role of volunteerism, they were the main source of information. And when they don't know, these misconceptions, which are also shared within the volunteer community, are left unaddressed, and the false information is shared out. Or confused altogether. I hope I answered that well.
I think the next question on accountability. So I would like that Julian and Max Maximilian, you would say something about that, as we hear from all the people that are experienced in local refugee protection and support. These are such severe crimes. So again, to this question, what can we do to hold the most responsible accountable? And that is the EU, that is EU member states. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, there are different layers of strategies to hold the EU or also the Libyan Coast Guard accountable. I mean, only a few days ago, the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, they filed a communication to the International Criminal Court, yeah, on grave crimes committed against migrants and refugees in Libya. And they urgently demanded the ICC must investigate the responsibility of armed groups, for example, or militias and Libyan state actors. This is one of the first times that civil society actors are trying, to mobilize these legal arenas against the Libyan Coast Guard directly. We have another case before the European Court of Human Rights where Italy is sued because of their cooperation with the Libyan Coast Guard. And this is very important because before the ICC, only the Libyan actors are held accountable. And for the European Court of Human Rights, we have the Italian side, which is also the representative of Europe, of course. But we have the problem that before the European Court of Human Rights, we cannot hold the European Union accountable. That's also a problem because absurdly, the European Union is not part of the European Convention on Human Rights. So nobody has the chance to file lawsuits against the against actors like Frontex or other actors before the ECHR in Strasbourg. But I mean, these are lawsuits which are but also part of a defensive strategy. I would say that law is, of course, a really important field of struggle, but in the end, it's a political fight. So it's a question in how far is Europe really concerned about the roots of the Geneva Convention and the right to asylum, because it was a direct reaction to the terrors of the National Socialist regime and the failures of the international state community to give refugees really a protection after the Second World War. And this was one of the historic lectures for Europe. And now, 70 years after, as Shireen also said, we are in a devastating situation. So first, on the political level, we must have a new discourse about migration, not in terms of security and order, but in forms of rights protection. And we must have an approach. And Isabel Shayani said, what is the realistic way? Yeah, what are real solutions? And I have the impression that the last 5 years, they show that this externalization policies with Turkey, with Libya, these are not realistic policies because they are crisis driven, and they are driven with cooperations with authoritarian actors which undermine the European idea. So what's realistic about that? So I would say a human rights protection mechanism and a human rights approach which has the foundation in the treaties of the European Union. This would be much more realistic to fulfill.
Julian, how do you discuss that on the national level for the next years?
I mean, the question has different layers, and I would always trust for the legal layer, I would always trust Max. But I can only comment on the political layer because I'm not a lawyer or a jurist, so that's where I can speak. I would again take the example from the Belarusian border. What we're seeing there are the same, more or less, the same measures that we're seeing in Turkey and Libya, that we're talking about for Tunisia. And I mean, you can just go along the European external borders. You will find them mostly everywhere. And the thing that stands behind that is, from my perspective, that these policies were driven from a racist standpoint, that people on the move are considered a threat, are considered in general as something that you don't want to have in your country. And in all legal debates, I think this is the the political and societal approach that we need to overcome and that we need to replace with an alternative that is based on the idea that people have dignity and that people have the right to life, the right to water, the right to medical treatments, and that must be the perspective that we open in the political discussions here in Berlin, because I think we need to accept the fact that we can not prevent people from seeking safety, but we can organize it, and that's what I want to do, and that is what we want to do here in Berlin with our party.
Thank you so much. So Isabel Chayani, you also had the big chance also with your colleagues from Monitor to be direct eyewitnesses to crimes like illegal pushbacks, and even the magazine Monitor could present some short movie about how Croatian border police are beating up the people. So we have witnesses, we have even proofs. So why is it so difficult to move on forwards? So perhaps, Ms. Chayani, you would also like to add something to this debate.
Yes, I'd love to. I have a question to Julian Parker as well. If we talk about constructive solutions and legal ways to Europe, so during the election campaign, I remember that one of the Green members of parliament was saying that Germany should offer at least 40,000 resettlement places. I don't know, is the English word places? Anyhow, so 40,000 people who should be resettled in Germany. Now you're a member of the, as you said, of the Committee of the Interior, which definitely is an issue that you might discuss there. What is the idea of the SPD? On that issue? How many do you think, realistically speaking, could be resettled? Point 1, point 2. There is this very little tiny civil society project called Nest, right? You probably know it, where you have like mentees and they of 5 people, and they can get people into the countries. And I learned from UNHCR that they have like 130 people coming to Germany through that way, which is almost nothing, but still the mechanism, I find the mechanism very interesting. And in Canada, they've been practicing it for 30 years. So if we talk about constructive solutions, I'd be really interested from you to hear 40,000, does the SPD pledge for more or for less? And Nest, do you have any idea if this will be continued or not? And the other thing is, you said, Bianca, what is going to happen? I don't know if I misunderstood Julian. He was talking about there is a warfare going on, or did you say there's no warfare going on?
There is a warfare.
So
no,
I think,
no, not at all. I'm the last person saying that. No, that was the narrative that was going on in Germany while we were at the border. Yes, no, those words will never come out of my mouth, as my opinion.
So I think it very much depends not only on the narrative, but also on the perspective of the majority of European politicians and the European Union. Is a warfare going on or not? If there is a warfare going on, then of course, forget about the Geneva Convention. This is a legal instrument that you can use in peace times, but not now. If a warfare is going on, then of course we have to defend our borders. And then all of us humanitarian dudes sort of can say, okay, our instruments are not the appropriate ones. And I think this is a very difficult and very precarious situation that we are in now, because obviously the situation is being defined by a majority, at least the majority of the Commission, as a hybrid war. I doubt it, but still, there is this whole narrative and rhetoric in the world, and hence you have a reason to justify why all those legal instruments that you have do not have to be implemented, as easy as that. So it's almost a present that Lukashenko is presenting to us, because here we are in a legal situation that Greece has already shown us. You block the external borders and you push on to the north, and that's the strategy. And the people in the country, you just leave them to themselves, and you have this very big word, I think Medico International, you used it first, I don't know where I read it first, Verelendung, which is really big. And this is what they do with the people, simply as that, it's a strategy. And as long as we have a majority in Europe that is in favor of that, I find it very difficult to think of alternatives, because this is democratic reality. Maybe I'm wrong. And I think it's very important here with all these players from the humanitarian field. I think it's very, very, very important that you guys show up with a constructive solution. If you always say, well, this is not enough and this is not enough, and we are worried for, okay, but I think it's important to say what would be an alternative. So Julian Parker, 40,000 or not?
Up to you.
Unfortunately, I'm a member of the Green Party and I'm not here to speak for the socialists. I'm very sorry, but I can say what
Cem
we have.
Özdemir said that. Even
That's
better.
possible. I haven't heard it from the socialists because I always try not to put the numbers in front. What we've negotiated in the so-called Ampel in the coalition, that we want to follow the numbers that are reported to us by the UNHCR as a basis. This is the fundament. And then on top, we think it is necessary, and this is also something that we agreed on with the three parties, that we come up with plans to provide people with a place of safety, as we've done with the Afghans in recent days, and decided on a plan for 25,000 people that we want to take in from Afghanistan to Germany on top.
But that was the previous government. Sorry that I put you into the
Yes,
wrong party.
and
But okay.
no worries. So this is the way we try to organize. If the socialists come forward with 40,000 people that they want to take in, absolutely, we would certainly be in favor for that. But again, I don't know how useful it is to always, try to find a number, because at the end we will find ourselves in the position as with Horst Seehofer, who said this is the limit that Germany will take in and no one more, and we're just far away from that. So I think this is not the way we're also winning the debate here. We're also having different other plans on taking people in, or on relocation programs, on what is called Bundesaufnahmeprogramme, which is like state, let's call it state reception programs, which are a way around, and something that we want to use also with the foreign ministry is the use of humanitarian visa, which is such a powerful instrument that we could use. I think in recent years, a few hundred of these visas have been given out, but it's a way of bringing people to safety in a very short time that we hopefully can also put in practice. Then on NEST, yes, we want to strengthen the NEST program. That is.
Can you shortly explain for the audience what is this program?
It's basically a partnership. It's basically a partnership program where people become like a godfather for people on the move, and then they're being recepted and they're being supported with a huge structure in money-wise and social help. That's something I think it's not very common. It's something we could think of using also more, the public-private, something like a public-private partnership. But from my point of view, I'm not really a big fan of replacing the state everywhere by providing help for those people. And I think the role of the state is the one that needs to be the first we think of. And then you were, Isabel, you were talking about warfare. Yes, there is a security threat to the European Union, but that is not from the people there at the border. That's coming from the planes that are flying over Poland, and that could possibly become a NATO case. That is a security threat. And I always want to differentiate between these two factors, because the people certainly aren't. And that is something that we need to be very careful with. Also here in the Bundestag, not everybody is, I can tell you.
Maximilian, you wanted also to say something about that.
Yeah, maybe why are people in Belarus? Why is it possible for them to escape via plane to Minsk? It's because that the European Union really closed all the doors, all the legal entries. And since 2001, we have a guideline in the European Union that effectively prohibits refugees to travel by plane and to escape by plane to the European Union. It was introduced originally in the war on terror, but it has real de facto effects on refugees. So one point could be that refugees should be able also to escape by planes to the European Union. So they are not driven to the deadly ways via the Mediterranean Sea, for example, or via the land borders. So this could be one possibility. I mean, before 2001, we also didn't have these harsh restrictions on plane travel since 2001, and this has something to do with a different approach on security and handling migration as a threat. Yeah, I mean, of course, also in the 70s and 80s, there were much racist problems in the approach towards migrants and refugees. But I mean, we have to think about what could be the legal entries to the European Union, so that not dictators like Lukashenko are able to have chances to instrumentalize refugees in these ways. And I would also say that we have to discuss in how far is really there restrictive discourse in Europe about migration. We have also cities in states like Hungary or in Poland who are open towards migration, yeah? And so maybe there's some idea of a European Union from below and not also from the national state with their logic of building the walls of the European Union much more stronger. So maybe these could be some instances to provide for a more progressive or more human rights oriented approach.
Yeah, so this would be also my next question to all of you. So how do we get to refugee policy on the EU level? Because it does not make sense only to speak about the German situation, the German policy. We need a EU that starts to think differently about this issue. So how do we get to a refugee policy, understanding refugees as subjects who have rights and not only as vulnerable people, victims or unwanted people? Like Hannah Arendt once stated that there is a right to have rights. So perhaps you can all give your opinion. So Max already came with the idea that we need European networks on the base to highlight that refugees have human rights, my God, and they have to be fulfilled. And if not, we have to do something against the responsible for these crimes. So I would like to have your opinion from all of you on that issue. So what do we need to create a European understanding that refugees are human beings with human rights that we have to accept and to guarantee? And with this, perhaps also, like, what are your demands for the European politics? Yeah, how to get to that point? So who would like to start to say something about it? It's a difficult question because criticizing is very easy because there are so many things to criticize, but we also need a vision, and that's also an objective of this series of lectures, to get ideas for new visions. Julian?
I can start.
Yeah, Shireen, of course, please.
Would you like me to start? Sure. So the way I see it, if I had a solution for this, probably I would be one of the best paid persons in Europe, and I would not be sitting in Lesbos micromanaging solutions for the symptoms of what I see as a systemic collapse globally. To me, this is a disintegration of the rights of refugees, and as a consequence of that, the Geneva Convention is completely being violated, is being bypassed. And I mean, the Geneva Convention represents laws, it represents rights, it's rights being violated. But when we talk about refugees, when we bring it in the narrative, for some reason, we have created this consensus that we can reduce the rights of refugees as something that can be negotiated, that they should just be happy with whatever they receive, as rights is a manner of charity. It's not. If you have the right, you have the right, and there's nothing more to say about that. But globally, we do have 83 million refugees. It's, I mean, the humanitarian crisis is located in Syria, it's located in Afghanistan, it's located in Iran. That's where the humanitarian crisis is. But we're really feeling the effect. And the way that we respond with it is, first of all, like I said, the disintegration of the right to have rights, meaning Geneva Convention, which we implemented so that people wouldn't be stateless, and that when they do not have any rights, they still have rights. This is what we're seeing now, that they no longer have access to it. And then we call it weapons. We call them, call the situation hybrid warfare. This is the twisted absurdity of what people without rights trying to get rights has led to. But without a doubt, it is 83 million. This is enormous challenge. Is not only 40,000, it's 83 million, and it's growing every single year. And the way we're doing things is simply not sustainable anymore. And we need a paradigm shift to be able to get out of whatever is happening now. And it can only continue crumbling from the way that I see it, unfortunately.
One question to you and to Marie also. So as you are also in touch with refugees that organize themselves, so what are their ideas? What are their demands in regard to the European Union, so that we also have a little their voices here in this session? So it would be great if you can tell a little bit about that.
So in terms of the self-organized work in Greece, they're simply following the Geneva Convention, where asylum seekers should manage as much as they could. It is not more, it is not less, it's only that, following the Geneva Convention. And even if we had been following the Geneva Convention, so much of what we see wouldn't have happened. Only that, putting that as a basic base bar, or what should I say? I can't think of the term now, but if this is the ground, so much of what we see wouldn't have happened if we just followed the Geneva Convention. But of course, where do we go after that? So from their side, at least the ones that I'm working with, more Corona Awareness Team, Memoria, White Helmets, they just want their rights. They just want to follow the Geneva Convention. They're not asking for any additional favors above that.
And just a question to you, Sabel Shayani, because with your work as journalist, you also try to give refugees voices that we hear about their situations. So coming back to the question on what we need to strengthen refugees' rights, I would like to continue to hear what you think about that and how we can strengthen that.
My feeling is that in Germany, at least, the public is not interested in these voices as much, because people are tired. Because there is no real solution to this whole problem, as we are just witnessing. So I think it's even more important to, and it's something that our brain somehow strikes to think about, but it's something that is even more important to think about solutions, because if we don't, then we will provoke our political enemies even more to abuse this issue. Exactly. The longer we are sort of struck and don't move at all, the more dangerous the situation gets. So you were asking what would be a solution. I mean, the reason I'm a journalist is because I probably don't have a solution. It's easier to ask than to answer. So Julian is in a much more difficult situation. But I think that this coalition of the willing within the EU, countries that are open to accept refugees or people who are asylum seekers, I think this is a realistic compromise. And I think anything else would just mean to lower the standards that we are witnessing right now. I think that those countries who are not willing to take anyone anyhow, or to push them on further east or further west or further north, I think they should compensate with money. I guess this is realistic. And I think only a compromise would at least avoid to abolish any kind of status like the Geneva Convention. You were mentioning the humanitarian visa. I think this is a very good instrument. We were talking about this NEST program, and Helen Defner, she wrote that this is exactly what one shouldn't do, if I'm not mistaken, if I get it right. And you say this is the states being put, the duty that should be the states is being put on civilians. I see it a bit different. I think you have a potential in civil society, and you have the willingness of people who love to support. So now on Monday, I will go to Paderborn, because in Paderborn you have a soccer club by Alevites, and they are waiting for a Somali family. They have rented this apartment already in August. They have even put the pictures on the wall, and they're waiting for them. I think this is also a legal way into Germany, and they are in charge for 2 years. They have to pay the rent, I think, and they have to accompany them with all those bureaucratic procedures. But then they are in. And I think, now I haven't been there, maybe on Tuesday I say the opposite, but my impression is that this is empowering both sides, because it works in Canada also, that you're empowering civil society and the others can come. Now, of course, you are right that it's very easy for the state to say, okay, the soccer club is doing it, BAMF is not responsible anymore, or we are not in this case. But I think you have to find solutions in society where the majority can be supportive. And we should have in mind that we don't want to lose the support. And right now, it's in a shaky situation. So people in the middle, I think, are pretty lost which side to look at. Is it the narrative of the hybrid war, or is it the capacity that we have in the civil society? And I hope that we can help them to look at the other side.
Okay, so as time is running out, I would give Julian the last word. As our new hope for future. I know that's a big responsibility for you, but at least we hope that there's a shift in the political debate with this new government. We hope so. And so please take the chance and give us some last words from you.
Why is it always the politician that has the last word?
You have to find solutions.
First, I have to accept the fact that I have to call myself a politician now. I'm still getting used to it. I want to be completely honest.
I imagine.
Yes, of course, we need a change on the European level. And I think it has to happen in 3 steps. And that is, first, and I want to be very pragmatic, we have to find a way that those states who are willing to accept people can take them in, and that we overcome this externalization of borders, and we have to get rid of the camps and get rid of the so-called Libyan Coast Guard and create a different, an interim system instead that needs to hold up as long as a new system is put in place, because we still have the unanimous vote in the European Council that is a huge burden at the moment. I think it can provide in some ways some sort of stability, but by now we have to the conclusion that we have to overcome this principle. And second is to end the systematic violation of human rights at the borders, and that will take some more time, I think, to reform Frontex. We cannot get rid of it. I'm not living in a la-la land, but we have to work with the system that is being provided, and we have to make the best of it. That's what I'm doing here in the Bundestag, and that's, I think, what we should do with the European Union. And then the third step must be to reform the European asylum system and to provide access, and to get those states to stand in solidarity with the European member states at the forefront, at the Mediterranean or somewhere else. And as Isabel said, that most likely we will come to a system that will work with compensation of those states who are not willing to accept. And then I think we can finally think about a system that is allowing procedures, asylum procedures, in Europe, which are generally being executed on the basis of a rule of law. That is, if I can make up a vision, that would be that vision. It's a long way to go. I know that, but it's what I want to work to or towards. And to not just end with this sometimes disillusioning political talks or points. What we can achieve outside the parliaments and outside the political institutions is what creates more movement than we can do from within. So organizing cities and organizing states and running organizations and funding new organizations and go on the streets with huge demos. That is something that improves the situation, not in 5 or 10 years, but most likely right now. And so with that, I would like to end. And thank you very much for having us.
Very last question to you. So you will get that. There's political pressure from civil society. I think.
Yes, please.
I hope it will get stronger and stronger. But one last question to you. Is there any option you see for emergency programs? So to help to get these people away from the external borders, away from these miserable conditions, and not looking for long-term solutions, but looking right now, what if there, do you see any options for emergency programs?
Yes, absolutely, I do. I'm seeing them right now for the situation at the Polish-Belarus border. This is something we're working on very hardly right now. And that is, I really hope that we will get a program or any sort of reception. It's an absolute joke that we haven't come up with that before, or the old government hasn't come up with that before. 11,000 people were reaching Germany in the, I think, in the past months, if I'm right. And if we would start to accept 2,000 or 3,000 people right now, it would just be, the region would be empty. But again, as I said, we need to find a way to get these people from the region in Belarus onto European soil. That is the biggest issue right now. So hopefully, fingers crossed, and we and the socialists, yes, are very much involved.
I think we all wish you very, very luck with that. So I would like to come to an end. So perhaps, is there something that any one of you wants to add at the end or declare at the end? Is there any question from the audience? If not, as I don't see anything, Ramona, I think that was it, huh? Okay, so then I would say we are at the end. I invite all participants who wants to get in touch with the speakers here. You can write me an email, and I can make it more easier to get in touch with our experts here. I thank everybody for being here and for making this difficult discussion. It's a very difficult discussion, we all know that. And I hope that this series of lecture can be a part of creating new networks in order to raise our voices for refugees' rights. So as this is the last session for this year, I just want to take the opportunity to invite everybody to follow us on 13th January with our next session. Then we will discuss about the critical role of development aid to obstruct refugee movement. This will be also a very exciting discussion, and I hope to see you all there. Okay, and until then, I wish you some peaceful holidays and a good night. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bianca.
Bye-bye.